Shalom Aleichem everyone, hope everyone's doing well. Bezrat Hashem, we're holding in Masechet Sanhedrin on Chaf Amud Bet 20b. We're going to start at the Mishnah, continuing to talk about the unique halachot associated with a melech, with the king of the Jewish people. And particularly we're going to have really one section today discussing the principle of the powers of a king, what he is able to do, what he isn't able to do, and certain responsibilities that he also has, which we'll see that the Jews had to enforce when they went into Eretz Yisrael. B'ezrat Hashem will start at the Mishnah, and our learning today, as always should be, a source of refuah shlema, zechut for refuah shlema for Yaakov ben Dinah. We should hear of a speedy, quick, and full recovery, and only b'sarot tovot, only good news. Now, the Mishnah here continues to talk about how a king, when he wanted to go to Milchemet HaReshut, when he wanted to go out to a voluntary war, meaning not an obligatory war, which Rashi explained earlier, the wars of Yeshua ben Nun, when he conquered Eretz Yisrael, those were obligatory wars. But later wars, to expand the border, would be considered Milchemet HaReshut. So, in order to go to war, he had to consult with the Sanhedrin of 71 to give the okay to do this, which we really mentioned earlier on the Mishnah in Bet Amud Aleph, and the Gemara will tell us why it reiterates the same point. Says the Mishnah, the king is allowed to go out to war in a voluntary battle only with the consent of the court of 71 of the Sanhedrin. He also is allowed to break down walls to make a path, and nobody could protest against him. Now Rashi learns what this refers to is, if he wants a easier access to his fields or his vineyards, his properties, he is allowed to. He has what's called eminent domain. He could say, I'm confiscating your territory because it's near my fields, and I want a shortcut to get to my properties, and no one's allowed to protest that. And the Mishnah tells us, Derech HaMelech ein lo shi'ur, the way of the king has no measurement, meaning however long or wide he wants to make this property that he can go through, the path, he is qualified and allowed to, and nobody can protest that. Now, when it comes to battle, everybody else would loot and bring the properties of the battle back, and he will take the first portion. Rashi says that he'll take 50% actually. The king gets 50% of that property that is looted and gathered in battle. Let's move on to the Gemara. The Gemara says like this. Tanina, we already learned in our Mishnah, Charazim, the one time, on Bet Amud Aleph, Ein motziin lemelchemet hareshut ela al pi beit din shel 71. If you remember, the Mishnah in Bet Amud Aleph had told us the different cases or the different scenarios that are adjudicated by a court of 3, 23, 71. And in 71, we said that you can only go to a battle that is a reshut, a voluntary battle, with the consent of the court of 71. So the Gemara says, why does it need to reiterate that in the halachot of the king if we already know that? So the Gemara answers, since we were talking about all the unique halachot associated with a king, therefore, we also taught that you can go out to a voluntary battle based on the word of the court of 71, meaning, which is part of the rules of a king too, is that he can't just go out to voluntary battle however he sees fit, but you need the great court of 71 to agree to it as well. Now, the Gemara here refers to a parasha in the Torah, which is in Tanakh, in Nevi'im actually, which is the story of how the first king was ultimately appointed. Now, it's in Sefer Shmuel. In Sefer Shmuel, I think it's chapter Tet, Yud, something like that, the early chapters in Sefer Shmuel, Shmuel Aleph. The story goes over there that Shmuel HaNavi was the leader of the Jewish people. He was the Navi, prophet. And at that time in history, they didn't have kings yet. They hadn't yet installed kings into the formal positions as we know it to be after the fact, like Shaul and David. So, as the leader of the Jewish people, Shmuel was tasked with guiding them and directing them. The Jews approached, we'll see exactly who it was, but the Jews approached Shmuel HaNavi and they said, we want kings like all the nations around us. If you go through the story there, it appears Shmuel HaNavi took this in perhaps the wrong way, or he got offended by this, rightfully or not, that's not the point of today's discussion. And he spoke with Hashem. Hashem ultimately tells him that's what they're asking for, then they should have a king, because that's what they seem to want. And Shmuel comes back to the people and he says, you'll have your king, but the thing is, you're going to have to realize, when we appoint a king into position of power, he takes all of the benefits from the Jewish people. It goes through an extensive list of all the benefits the king takes. All of the benefits his power allows him to take. So just a few of them, it says, he'll take your sons and daughters for his service, he'll take your produce, your fields, all of the things that a king is entitled by right because of his position. This is going to be the king that you're asking for. Ultimately, they agree, and eventually, Shmuel appoints Shaul HaMelech to be the first king of the Jewish people. So the Gemara here goes through a debate, as we're going to see. Was that a genuine list of things that the king is allowed to take and benefit from? Or was it just to put awe of the king in the eyes of the people? Means he wanted to fulfill, as we're going to see, Som Tasim Alecha Melech, is that the people need to have awe of the king. So he wanted the people to have the appropriate level of awe or dignity or respect of the king. So he said all of these seemingly harsh things, but really those are things the king is not allowed to enjoy. It's the machlok. Let's see. Rav Yidamar Shmuel says like this: Kol ha'amor beparashat Melech, all the things that are said in the parasha of the king, which we referred to in Sefer Shmuel, when he says your sons and daughters will be taken, etc. All of those things, Melech mutarbo, they're real, means they're legitimate. The king is permitted to enjoy all of those benefits. It wasn't just to scare the people so that they understand how much awe they're going to have of this king. That's the pshita of Rav Yidamar Shmuel. Rav argues and says, Lo ne'emra parsha zo, no. It was only said, El la'ayem aleihem, to incite awe in the people in the way that they would view the future king. Shene'emra, like it says in the Torah, Som tasim alecha melech. It says, you shall place a king on you. What does it mean on you? It means that when the people have a king over them, shetehei emato alecha, that the awe of the king has to be on the people. So Rav learns differently than Shmuel. He says really the king was not allowed to enjoy those benefits. It was simply to explain to the people the perspective they're going to have of this king is that he can do all of these, take all of these benefits from them, even though he can't really, so that they have a proper awe of that king. More says Kitanoi, this machloket amoraim, Rav and Shmuel, is reflected in a machloket Tanaim. Because the Braita teaches, Rabbi Yossi says, Kol ha'amor beparashat Melech, all that is said in that parasha of Shmuel, Melech mutarbo. So this is like the shita of Shmuel. Before Rabbi Yossi, the Tana is reflective of the later opinion of the Amorish Shmuel that he's actually permitted in all of those benefits. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, the Tana Rabbi Yehuda says, Lo ne'emra parsha zo, ela kedei la'ayem aleihem. It was only to incite awe into the people, and this is reflective of the later shita of Rav, that it wasn't things he could actually benefit from. Like it says, Som tasim alecha melech, shetehei mato alecha, that the people should have awe of the king. Similarly, Hayar Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda said the following: Gimel mitzvot nitztavu Yisrael b'kinyasatan la'aretz. There were 3 mitzvot the Jews had to fulfill when they entered Eretz Yisrael. 3 unique mitzvot. And we're going to see these were actually contingent one on the other. 1, l'ha'amid lahem melech, to appoint for themselves a king. Number 2, ulahachrit zar'o shel Amalek. Number 2 was to destroy the seed of Amalek, the generations of Amalek, which we know they ultimately did not fulfill. Actually, coming up to Purim now, we know Haman was of the generations of Amalek. They ultimately didn't fulfill that mitzvah entirely, and that will only be in the future days in Mashiach. And number 3, v'levnot lahem beit habchira, to build a house for Hashem, a beit hamikdash for His presence to rest in. And Rabbi Norai says, Lo ne'emra parasha zo, ela kineged truamatan. Tarumatan, excuse me. This whole parasha was only said because of their complaints. And this is a very unique shita. Rabbi Norai seems to say this whole idea of the king, Som tasim alecha melech, it actually was not an imperative. They did not have to appoint a king over themselves. It was only because they complained in the days of Shmuel that they did indeed appoint a king, but they did not need to, me'ikar adin. Shene'emar, like the pasuk says, V'amarta asim alai melech, Shmuel says, you the people, you have said to me, we want to place on ourselves a king v'gomer. Meaning that the position of Rabbi Norai, which is very interesting, he seems to be saying is, they would not have appointed a king. It wasn't an imperative, like Rabbi Yehuda is saying. It was one of the mitzvot you had to do. Rather, it was only appointed because they complained but it wasn't actually necessary. Tanur Belezer, Omer Belezer says, Zikanim shebedor kehogen sha'alu. The elders in the generation, when they approached Shmuel, they approached appropriately, asked appropriately. Shene'amar, like it says, Tina lanu melech l'shaftenu. They said, we want a king to judge us. That's what they said to Shmuel. And this is considered appropriate. And Rashi learns, why was that considered appropriate? 1 second. So Rashi explains that the elders, they said, we want the king to judge us and to deal with the stubborn people. Meaning, we want a king to keep us in line, which was actually a very appropriate thing to say. But the people that were Amei Aretz Shavan Kilkalu, those are the ones that asked inappropriately. They're the ones that acted in an inappropriate way. Shene'emar, like it says in the pasuk there in Shmuel Aleph, Vayinu Gam Anachnu Kechol HaGoyim, we will be like all the other nations. Vishaftenu Malkenu, our king will judge us. V'yatzal lefanenu, he'll go out for us in battle. Means they wanted a king who could be a powerful king that could conquer in battle, and they didn't necessarily want it for the right reasons. Therefore, the Gemara says, according to the Shita, the Rebbe Lazar, is that the Amei Haaretz asked inappropriately, but the Zkenim in the generation acted actually in an appropriate fashion. Okay. 1 second. Fine. Says the Gemara, let's continue. Tana Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi said, Shalosh, referring to this idea of Rabbi Yehuda we had before. Shalosh mitzvot nitztavu Yisrael b'knisatan la'aretz. There were 3 mitzvot the Jews were commanded when they entered Eretz Yisrael. L'ha'amid lahem melech, to appoint for themselves a king. U'la'achrid zaro shel Amalek, to destroy the descendants of Amalek. V'livnot lahem beit habchira, and to rebuild and to build a Beit HaMikdash. So we know that these 3 mitzvot were commanded when the Jews, upon entering Israel. Now, Rabbi Yossi continues, Ve'eni yodea, I don't know what would be the order of this. Meaning, at face value, you could do these in different orders. So what's the proper order? So the answer is like this. Kishu Omer, when it says in the pasuk, when Hashem talks about Amalek, it says, Ki yad al kes ka milchama la Hashem ba'Amalek. The hand of Hashem is on the throne of God. Milchama la Hashem ba'Amalek. A war of Hashem against Amalek. Now, what is this referring to? Havei Omer, so you could say, L'ha'amid lahem melech techila. It means to appoint a king first. Now, as we're about to emphasize, the king is considered an embodiment or representation of Hashem in this world, the Jewish king. So therefore, when it says that the war of Hashem is against Amalek, that seems to be the first thing. But it means the king who represents him will fight against Amalek, which implies the king has to be appointed first. Ve'en kisei alamelech, because kisei refers to the king. Shne'amar, like it says, regarding Shlomo, it says, Vayeshev Shlomo al kisei Hashem lamelech. Shlomo sat on the throne of Hashem, reference to kisei, as a king. So now what we've deduced is, it's the king's mission who's first appointed to then fulfill the mission of Hashem to destroy Amalek. So that would be 1 and 2. Va'adayin eini yodea, but I still don't know, im livnot lahem beit habchira tchila, if they first have to build a Beit HaMikdash, or la'achrid zaros shel Amalek tchila, or do they have to destroy the descendants of Amalek first? Meaning, we know that the king has to first be appointed, and then later is the destruction of Amalek able to be fulfilled through that king. But does he first have to build a Beit HaMikdash, or first destroy Amalek? Kishu Omer, when the pasuk says, V'hiniach lachem mikol oivechem, it says that your enemies you'll be relieved of all your enemies, v'gomer, and then it says, V'ayam makom asher yivcha Hashem v'gomer, then you will have a special place for the Beit HaMikdash. So Heve Omer would imply, La'achrit zaro shel Amalek tchila, the first you destroy Amalek, meaning your enemies, and then afterwards you could build the Beit HaMikdash. V'chem David Omer, and like it says by David HaMelech, it says we know David HaMelech's greatest desire was to build the Beit HaMikdash, and he wasn't granted that. He said, your son Shlomo will build it, you won't be allowed to. Yashav HaMelech David b'veiso, it was after his wars, he sat in his house, Hashem iniach lo misaviv, Hashem gave him respite, calm from all of the surrounding wars. And it says, Vayomer HaMelech al Natan HaNavi, David said to Natan HaNavi, Re'ena anochi yoshev beveit harazim v'gomer, I'm sitting comfortably in my house, and the Aron is not in the Beit HaMikdash. That's when he wanted to build the Beit HaMikdash. So the point is, we find this idea that the king first that first you have to destroy the enemies, including Amalek, and then you build the Beit HaMikdash. So therefore, the Gemara concludes that the order of the 3 mitzvot is first you appoint a king, then you destroy Amalek, and finally you build the Beit HaMikdash when it's meant to be. Now, it's interesting to note, actually, is that Shaul HaMelech in Navi, he was tasked to destroy Amalek, and he was not successful. He left over Agag and some Chevra there, some of the people of Amalek, the whole story as animals, etc. But ultimately, Amalek continued. V'haraya, we know till today, because we know that the descendants of Amalek ended up being Haman, which persecuted the Jews in the days of the Purim story with Mordechai. We know the whole story. So they didn't actually succeed in carrying out that mission entirely, although the first and third, it seems like they did do, which is they did have kings, and they also built a Beit HaMikdash. So it's just the middle one, L'chora, which wasn't fulfilled, which really the Torah seems to predict that, because until the end of days, when Hashem's throne will be completed with the destruction of Amalek, when Mashiach comes, that will actually occur. We're going to stop here. Amar Reish Lakish. We'll continue on tomorrow. It's about 20-25 lines from the bottom of Chaf Amud Bet, continuing to talk about Shlomo HaMelech and his reign. In the meantime, I wish everybody a wonderful day.